In today's video, I continue with and finish up my adventure through the Tribunal featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Last time, I searched for and found a mysterious relic called Barelzar's Mazed Band. Returning back to Mournhold, I handed it over directly to the goddess, Almalexia. 24 hours later, I was informed that the city was under attack. It turned out to be these half-creature, half-machine beings, which emerged from underneath the memorial statue. Tienius asked me to look into it, and I was able to confirm that the beings were not Dwemer in nature. Upon my return, I met with King Helseth. He tasked me with retrieving information on the latest royal assassination plot. I learned it was against Queen Mother Baranzaya, and I was tasked with defending her. After that, Helseth asked me to battle against his royal bodyguard, Carid, to test my true nature. Finally, Almalexia tasked me with going back down into the Dwemer ruin in order to activate a weather-changing machine. This is where the story continues. Speaking with Almalexia, she expresses her gratitude towards me, calling me a good and faithful servant. She remarks that no other gods have displayed dominion over the land and sky like she has. She then tells me that there's troubling news. One of her hands is missing. Her guard, Salus Valor, has abandoned his post and now roams around Mournhold spewing lies and misinformation about Almalexia. She still harbors goodwill towards him. However, he presents a threat to her cause and the Tribunal. The goddess tells me I will more than likely have to strike him down. The catch is that even the Ordinators are afraid to approach him, as he's a weapon master and war wizard. When asked further about Salus, Almalexia considers his dive into madness her fault, as she let him get too close to her. Exiting the conversation, I asked around Mournhold about where I could find the hand. Landing in God's Reach, a High Ordinator told me that Salvus was nearby. Looking a little further, I spotted the hand of the goddess and approached him. He was immediately aggressive towards me and mentioned how he used to be her favorite servant. Salvus said that it doesn't matter which of us dies, as regardless, Almalexia will be pleased. He tells me to make peace with my gods, and the battle begins. Salus fought with an ebony scimitar for close combat, and some silver poison darts for ranged combat. The poison darts, also known as her darts, were highly effective against me, and led to my death many times. I was better off fighting against him face to face, but his sword, also known as her scimitar, can damage fatigue and strength, as well as absorb strength and project frost damage. Too many hits with this weapon also led to my death. On top of that, Salvus's armor and spells gifted him with a lot of fortifications and abilities, the most troublesome of which was a powerful reflect spell. This would be the lead cause to most of my deaths, as pretty early on, I thought the best way for me to defeat him was through my destruction magic. I ended up dying a lot in this fight, but I eventually found the method that worked best for me. I would cast my frost spell, and if it hit, I'd distance myself from Salvus and save the game. I did this a couple of times, getting some pokes and prods in with the spear as well. Healing and regenerating my stats with what I could, I continued this process, casting some weaker spells, and finally, Salvus was defeated. His armor was nifty and powerful, making me slightly wish that I was proficient in it. Returning to Almalexia, she asked me if I had dealt with the missing hand. Telling her yes, she expresses her sorrows for Salvus. In the end though, because I served her gracefully, she grants me the choice of a new blessing. The options are for fortification in all armor types, resistance against paralysis, or a fortification for health. Choosing the last one, she tells me to continue with my faith, thus ending the quest, the missing hand. Speaking again with Almalexia, she welcomed me back and said it was time that we talked of greater things. Since proving myself to her on multiple occasions, she's come to truly recognize me as the Nerevarine, and says that at long last, her Nerevar has returned. Almalexia remarks that the time has finally come for me to reclaim my station, and that together, her and I can cast out the Imperials. Inquiring further, she retells the stories of old, how the Chimer and Dwemer were at odds, and that it took the invasion of the Nords for them to combine forces. She tells me that her and Nerevar were actually married. On the day of their wedding, the dwarf king Dumak gifted them the blades of Hope's Fire and True Flame. Almalexia tells me that she has kept her sword, Hope's Fire, but Nerevar's has been missing since the battle at Red Mountain. True Flame was shattered into pieces. However, Almalexia has one of them on her, and senses that the others are nearby. She tasks me with finding all of them and having them reforged. She tips me off by saying that the craftsman of Mournhold could likely reforge it, and I should seek out those who have an affinity for ancient weaponry. Exiting the temple, I decided to go to Platinius Marrow for some knowledge. Marrow tells me that he doesn't have much information, but gives me the names of those who might. He calls out the Queen Mother Baranzaya, as well as Torasa Aram, the curator of the museum. Heading to the royal palace first, Baranzaya opens up by commenting on the fact that I defeated Karad in battle. Exploring that conversation, she tells me that since he actually spoke with me, he might be able to help me find a missing piece of the blade. The Queen recognizes my Nerevarine status and further suggests that the blade Karad used against me in battle might pique my interest. Exiting the conversation and going over to the throne room, Karad speaks to me and asks how he can be of assistance. Inquiring about the pieces of the blade, the Redguard tells me that his father gave him this weapon as a child. He was told that the day someone defeated him in battle was the day the rightful owner came to claim that sword. He hands the odd Dwemer weapon over and I swing it around a bit. It's a nice feeling blade, but not really one that I've had the pleasure to test out before. Moving along, the next person I make way for is Terasa in the Museum of Godsreach. Asking about the pieces, she tells me that she hasn't seen any obvious fragments, but she does have a piece originating from the same time period. It's apparently a Dwemer shield, although its working and craftsmanship doesn't really make sense. Terasa says she's willing to part with it in exchange for a form of compensation. She says that if I'm willing to donate some rare and unique items to the museum, she's more than happy to hand over the shield. The only two that I'm prompted to give away are the Dagger of Symmachus and the Boots of Blinding Speed. There was no way I was handing the boots over, so I had to find a second item for her. After doing some digging, an easy one for me to obtain was the Bow of Shadows, back on the island of Vardenfell. I made my way to Venom Ancestral Tomb, took out all of the enemies inside, and secured the artifact. Returning to Terasa, I donated the dagger and bow, which, to be honest, was hard to do as combined, both would have netted me over 30,000 gold if I had chosen to sell them instead. Regardless, after doing so, she gifted me the Dwemer battle shield, and remarked at how a smith could fix its loose spike. Exiting the conversation and going to the craftsman hall, I presented the battle shield to Yagek Grogluk, and he immediately spotted something. The spike wasn't supposed to be a part of the shield at all. He separates the two and comments on how unique the spike is, calling it Dwemer in origin, but unlike anything he's ever seen before. I asked him if he could forge the Blade of Nerevar, and he responded by saying that when he's done, it will be the finest blade I've ever seen. He tells me to return in 2 days' time. Forcing a 48-hour wait, Yagek hands me the blade back and mentions that he isn't sure why it's not ablaze. He tells me to talk to a Dwemer and remarks that I can probably find some writings on the effect down in Baum's Amshend. Yagek knows that none of them are left alive, but he specifically calls out a Dwemer mystic named Radek Strungthums. If I were to bring back his writings to the orc, he'll see what he can do for me. The True Flame blade looks amazing and has some pretty good stats. It's definitely a blade that I'd love to use, and again, makes me want to start training with longswords. Making my way over to Plaza Brindisi-Doram and descending into Baum's Amshend, I journeyed through the passageways, fighting off Dwemer centurions, until I arrived at Radek's forge. Wandering into the small study, I saw the apparition of a Dwemer wandering back and forth. Approaching, it was the ghost of Radek. He tells me to leave him alone and that I should let an old spirit haunt. I tell him I want to speak with a Dwemer mystic, and he laughs in my face. He was never one to begin with, just a soldier who made weapons. Radek does ask me about my blade though, questioning if I want to add fire to it. I tell him yes, and he says that that's a rather easy alteration to make. The only ingredient I need to procure is pyroil tar. He tells me that it can be found deep within the Daedric ruins of Noren Dur, located below Baum's Amshend. Radek warns me though that I will likely run into trouble at this ruin. It's old, dangerous, and questionable as to what lurks within it. Exiting the conversation, I crawled through the dark hole leading to Noren Dur and traveled to a zone called the Teeth That Gnash. This area contained multiple enemies, including Storm Atronachs and Bone Lords. Taking them out, I ascended some stairs and fought against two Dremora. Just beyond them was a door leading to the zone called Citadel of Mindrur. Radek specifically mentioned that this was the area in which I was likely to find the Pyroil Tar. Inside, I spotted a few enemies, such as Golden Saints and more Dremora. Getting in closer, I aggroed a few onto me, one of them being the Dremora Lord, Cash Tidrur. This Daedroth certainly had a good bit of health, and I was careful not to let it get in close. I swam through the waters, keeping it at bay and casting some spells, until finally Tidrur was defeated. Quickly looting the tar, I made my way out of the ruin, avoiding any further unnecessary confrontations. Returning back to Radek, I handed the substance over to him and he altered my sword. He wished me luck and sent me on my way. True Flame now had a Wicked Flame effect attached to it, and had a fire enchantment of 30 points for 1 second. Now, this was a blade I really wish I could have used. Unfortunately, my long blade skill was poor, so there really wasn't much of a point in using it. Leaving Bom Zomshend, I ran back along to Almalexia in the temple, thus ending the quest, the Blade of Nerevar. Entering inside of the High Chapel and speaking with Almalexia, she asks me if I was able to reforge the blade. I told her yes, and she was ecstatic. Almalexia said there was but one more task that needed to be done, and it pains her to even think about it. She reminisces of her glory days with Sothasil, the camaraderie the two of them shared, as well as their achievements together. At the end of it though, she expresses her belief that the Tinkerer has gone mad. Inquiring further, Almalexia remarks that he once held a special spot within the Tribunal, similar to how both her and Vivek rule over different sections of Morrowind. He eventually grew tired of mortals and locked himself away within Clockwork City, his own personal domain. The city itself is complex, ever-changing, and full of puzzles. She draws parallels between it and its creator, both tainted by madness. Almalexia reveals that she suspected him to be a frequent visitor of the Shivering Isles. Upon each return, he would delve further into insanity. He wishes harm upon the rest of the Tribunal, and Almalexia knows what must be done with him. She confirms the king's suspicions, that Sothasil was the one to release the Fabricants upon the city, and that it's finally time he be stopped. She says it's unlikely he can be reasoned with, and that death might be the only solution. The True Flame Blade has the ability to kill a god, and she wraps up by asking me if I'm ready to get sent over to Clockwork City. Before doing so, I quickly stocked up on health and magicka potions, buying out a whole lot of them from the magic shop. Gear repaired and potions in inventory, I got teleported over to Sothasil's domain. The first zone was called the Outer Flooded Halls. It took me a while to find the switch located in the first room, and after activating it, I made my way through various traps and passageways until finally stumbling upon a door leading into the Inner Flooded Halls. This area was similar in aesthetics to the Outer Halls. Here, I ended up coming across some verminous Fabricants. I didn't really get a good feel for their overall toughness when they were attacking Mournhold. However, I see now that they can be pretty strong and hit for some good damage. After maneuvering through more traps and rooms, I found myself outside of the Hall of Delirium. The look of this area was completely different to the last two. These were tighter halls and darker corridors. Facing off against more enemies and venturing into dead ends, I entered inside of the central gearworks. So far, I didn't really have any problems fighting against the Fabricants. At most, I'd be battling two at a time, and often, one of them would get stuck behind the other. My spear was able to keep me at a safe distance from their attacks as well. It was also easy enough for me to wander back into a previous zone and rest until healed if need be. From the gearworks, I made my way into the Hall of Theuda. This area was where things started to pick up. Hulking Fabricants were introduced to the fight, and they were certainly a tougher force to be reckoned with. They hit just as hard, if not harder, than the verminous ones, and they had a lot more health. The Hall of Theuda wasn't very complex though, and soon I arrived at the Dome of Cassia. The dome was a really interesting area. It contained 3 enemies on the ground level. The catch, however, is that there was a saw blade attached to a mechanical arm spinning around the top section. It moved at incredible speeds and results in instant death for me if it makes contact. After defeating the enemies, I tried to outrun the blade a couple of times, but it didn't work. This was when I decided to just use a leaping spell, and it actually worked quite well. The next zone was called the Dome of Serlin, and this area was the most confusing one for me. It was a small room with a contraption at its center. On the right side, it contained 2 switches, and inside of the contraption, through a pair of sealed doors, was the way into the next zone. The kicker is that the switches appear to work in mysterious ways, at least at first. The right lever trips the door on the inside, and the left lever trips the door on the outside, yet they can't be activated at the same time. Fiddling around with it, verminous fabricants started to come out of the small chamber, and at one point, it seemed as though the switches were going through some sort of cycle. After much trial and error, the correct sequence involves tripping the outer door, and at the correct moment, tripping the inner door. Rushing inside, I found myself in the Hall of Salemu. Back to some sort of straightforward thinking, I dueled 2 hulking fabricants at once, which was a challenge in its own right. My fatigue wasn't always full, and my spear wasn't in the best condition, so these fights were quite lengthy and tiresome. Soon, I arrived in a new area called the Dome of Udok. This zone, similar to the Dome of Serlin, had another puzzle to it. After taking out the fabricant, I surveyed the room. There was a pit of some sort of substance in its depths. On the small catwalk by the entrance, there was a lever, and trying to pull it, the game told me I wasn't strong enough. Trying to play smart, I attempted to run and leap on the small platform connecting to the door. Doing so, I looked for a way into the next zone. Peeking into every crack and crevice, attacking it from all angles, I just couldn't locate a way through. I then went into my inventory and discovered a few different ways to buff up my strength. Boosting it to beyond 100, I tried the lever again, and this time, a bridge appeared. Taking it to the other side, I entered into the Hall of Maletho. The hall contained a few more fabricants, both hulking and verminous. Methodically making my way through the rooms and halls, slaying anything in my way, I arrived at some doors leading to the Dome of the Imperfect. Inside, I laid eyes on 2 massive Dwemer machines, both taking the forms of some kind of centurion. Getting in close, steam started to pour out of the one on the right, and it began to move. It charged in at me, stomping and thrashing around. It had melee moves of ground pounds and kicks, as well as a ranged spell attack. Its close combat attacks weren't too difficult for me to dodge, and were my preferred movesets to go up against. I poked and prodded it with my spear, strafing around the room and staying on my toes. When possible, I cast my flame spell on it, taking down chunks of its health. It was a hard-fought battle, and honestly, it proved to be a pretty tough opponent. Soon, I landed the finishing blow on the Imperfect and went inside of the Dome of Sothasil. The scene was quite disturbing. At the center of the room, attached via wires to some sort of contraption, was the disfigured, broken, dismembered, lifeless corpse of Sothasil. His body strung up by wires, swiveling around. His eyes were soulless and his mouth lay agape. Approaching the horror show and interacting with it, the game tells me that he's dead, and that someone else got to him before me. Unsure of where to go from here, I tried to exit the room.
Here it ends. This clockwork city was to be your death. You were to be my greatest martyr, the heroic Nerevarine, sacrificing all to protect Morrowind from the mad Sothasil. But you live. You live. Fear not. I will tell the tale myself when this is done. I will tell my people how with your dying breath you proclaimed your devotion to me, the one true God. Your death will end this prophecy and unite my people again under one God, one faith, one rule by my divine law. The puppet king will lay down his arms and bow to my will. Those who do not yield will be destroyed. The mazed band has allowed me to travel to this place. Here I slew Sothasil. Here I summoned the fabricants to attack Mournhold. I will be the savior of my people. I alone will be their salvation. None may stand in my way. Not you, And certainly not Vivek. He is a poet, a fool. I will deal with him when I have finished with you. And Sotha Sil. He always thought himself our better, shunning us, locking himself in his hole. He spoke not a word as he died, not a whisper. Even in death he mocked me with his silence. But I think you will scream, mortal. For now you face the one true God.
Almalexia, after revealing her plans and recounting the events truthfully, comes in for the attack. She was the hardest opponent that I've had to face yet. She fought with Hope's Fire in close quarters, and with any space created, she would let off a powerful spell that had an equally alarming blast radius. I died countless times to her. Often there would be no rhyme or reason when it came to her switching attacks. I'd be right in front of her, and she'd hit me point blank with her destruction spell. The magic was much harder to deal with than Hope's Fire. I could counter the distance with my spear, but when she cast her spell, it didn't matter where I was in the room, as part of it was going to hit me no matter what. My time spent dueling her was lengthy. It even got to the point where I was second-guessing my abilities, if I should have even progressed this far to begin with. Most hopes seemed lost, that was, until I learned of my secret weapon. I realized that I could exit the dome of Sotha Sil and go back into the dome of the Imperfect. Doing so, it reset Almalexia's attack animations. So, after much trial and error, my technique going forward involved poking her with my spear or casting destruction spells, then quickly leaving before she could let off an attack. This tedious cycle continued for quite some time until she permanently switched up her attack set. She stuck with only using Hope's Fire, and it changed the game a bit. I was able to stick around longer, repeatedly striking her with my spear. When she knocked me down, I would pop a health and magicka potion, cast a destruction spell, and leave the zone. Eventually, her health got really low, and I was confident in my ability to close out the fight. I leapt in with my spear, hitting her over and over again. Pressing the attack, hoping she wouldn't catch me off guard, I soon had a huge sigh of relief, as Almalexia was defeated. I eluded Hope's Fire and Berelzar's mazed band from her body. Using the ring, it brought me back to Mournhold. Exiting the temple, the ash storms were gone, and I was visited by a familiar face.
You have done well, mortal. The death of Almalexia is a boon for all of Morrowind, though it may take time for this to be understood. She would have betrayed the Dhamma as surely as she had betrayed all those whom she loved. This was her curse and her undoing. Weep not for Sotha Sil. He shed his mortality long ago, and I am certain his death was no small relief to him. These gods lived with the burden of a power no mortal was meant to possess. Your work in Morrowind is not finished, Nerevarine. Vivek still lives, but I believe his time grows short. Protect my people. Defend these lands. The skies of Mournhold are clear once again. Let these people suffer no longer. Now go, mortal. Embrace your destiny and go with my blessing.
Azura's visitation marks the end for the Tribunal questline. Before wrapping things up though, I wanted to speak with two more NPCs. The first was King Helsith. Finally, he opened up with some different dialogue. He tells me that he's heard a great deal of rumors surrounding Almalexia, myself, and the rest of the Tribunal. He asks if I learned anything from the attacks. I fill him in on all the details, and he's absolutely astounded. He can't believe the fabricants were Almalexia's doing, and that both her and Sotha Sil are dead. Helsith believes my tale, but says that others are less likely to. As a piece of his gratitude, the king rewards me with a set of Royal Guard armor. The last person I wanted to speak with was Vivek. When asked about Almalexia, I'm prompted to tell him about the death of both her and Sotha Sil. Doing so, Vivek is extremely saddened by the news. He predicted that Almalexia would likely lash out, and expected himself to be targeted before Sotha Sil. He reflects on his own mortality, and even suggests that one day his death may come at my hands. Vivek knew that these events would likely occur, and that one by one the Tribunal would fade. Nevertheless, these were his oldest companions, and now they're both gone. King Helseth was correct in his assumptions that most of the citizens wouldn't believe my story. I tried telling Platinius different versions of it, and each time he scoffed and dismissed me. This truly makes my journey feel more isolated and lonesome. With that, thus ends the quest, the Mad God, and furthermore, that concludes the main questline for the Tribunal expansion featured in the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind. The Tribunal was a lot of fun to get to play through. I really enjoyed the city of Mournhold, its aesthetics, NPCs, unique establishments, questlines, etc. A key point for the main game's storyline was the Tribunal itself, and I was really happy to see the other members get some time in the limelight. Almalexia's character was intriguing and amusing to interact with. Peeling back the curtains into her slow downward spiral felt like a fantastic way to build up the story. On top of that, King Helseth and the monarchy also helped in shedding more information regarding the current climate of Mournhold. It was nice to speak with Baron Zaya, Phaedrus, Tienius, Platinius, and Helseth. Their unique viewpoints and knowledge of the world were pretty fascinating. If anything, I wish that Helseth played a bigger role in the endgame phase. There's a lot of built-up tension between the monarchy and the temple. Not to mention, it feels like there are still a lot of unanswered questions surrounding King Helseth. I'm unsure if his lore gets touched upon anymore in the game, or if Bethesda just neglected to finish off a paranoid lying usurper king's storyline. This might be an answer I find out soon, or never at all. The low parts for me during this questline was all of the sewer crawling. I found the sewers themselves to be uninteresting and lengthy, but the unique zones that came after them made up for it. The ruins of Baum Amshend and the Dwemer secrets within were also really neat to get to go through. I'll give Bethesda some personal credit, as I thought the way they handled not wanting to expand beyond Mournhold was clever. Old sewer systems, ruins, and hidden caves. Like I said, some of it got a little old in the end, but other parts felt new and innovative. Clockwork City also felt like an interesting place. I liked how it included a mixture of both fighting and problem solving. The boss fights in this questline felt pretty difficult, but I think that was a personal skill issue. Highlight quests were Hunt the Dark Brotherhood, the Royal Palace optional quests, an attack on Mournhold, an assassination attempt, a show of power, the Blade of Nerevar, and the Mad God. I really enjoyed getting to play through the Tribunal expansion for the first time, and I'm happy I got to experience it with all of you. Until next time, keep on adventuring.